We have Aidan Gomez, the co-founder and CEO of Cohere.
The ability to adapt to those environments and change yourself and the company to fit, that's been the only way that we've survived. So getting into Google the first time was like total fluke. And I actually shouldn't have been an intern at Google. And I found that out on my last day. And I'd be like sitting at the gym, and in between sets, I'd have my stack of papers with my pencil and just like writing notes. And so every moment of free time was dedicated to studying. And, solutions integrators like Accenture and Deloitte, they are going to make a killing because it's like a total refactor of the tech stack.
You may be saying the return is going to be AGI, but your investors may have more short-term goals.
Well, I would not say that. I think we're definitely in the point where investors have just said, no, sorry, we're not going to give you that extra X billion dollars. Like if I could capture every thought in your head for your entire, hopefully 100-year lifespan, that would be my dream.
It's cool again to talk about enterprise products. I'm excited for that. We're so back.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting show for you here today. This is somebody I have known for a while, but are happy to have in the house with us here in person. We have Aidan Gomez, the co-founder and CEO of Cohere, one of the leading companies in all things AI. And Aidan, I want to have this conversation with you for a long time. So thank you for coming over.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm sorry for being so late.
Braving London traffic, the holidays.
We want to make this awesome. No, thank you. We're going to get a lot into Cohere, what you guys do, and the state of AI, the state of enterprises adopting AI. But when we first met, the thing which I think we really bonded on and what really struck me was your childhood and upbringing in Canada, because it's a bit unconventional, but also something a lot of people watching this can probably connect to. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got into computers.
Yeah. So I grew up in Canada, in rural Ontario, on a, pretty big plot of land that was mostly covered in forest. And so it was a very Canadian upbringing. Both my parents are immigrants to Canada, but still every spring we would tap the maple trees, hang up the buckets, collect the sap, boil it down. So yeah, it was a super in touch with nature upbringing. It came with challenges. One of those was that it was basically impossible to get high-speed internet. It still is actually. We have
Has Starlink fixed it?
We have Starlink now, which is like way better than anything that came before. Because initially it was just dial-up, right? Like we had a telephone wire that we had to run to the house, and we were doing dial-up. Then we went to whatever the previous gen of satellite internet was. And if it was like cloudy or like there was a storm, gone,
you're dead.
Like fully gone.
It.
So it was a little bit tricky, but I think that scarcity or lack of access really made it fascinating for me. It made it like really gripping. There was this thing that was like just out of reach. Like I could experience when I went over to a friend's house, but at home,
you didn't have access to it. So how did you get into computers? Internet, everything else.
Yeah, so we had computers and like video games at home. I couldn't connect them to the internet effectively. I had dial-up. And so I started getting really interested in how to make it faster.
Okay.
And so how to improve my computer. That led me to teaching myself how to code. Then I started making websites for myself.
Okay.
It was just sort of like there was this deep curiosity and fascination with this technology that was just not working for me, but was working for everyone else.
Nice. Wow. Okay. And
I think it's very similar to our childhoods in a way.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit older than you, where the lack of actual working internet for long periods of time, in our case, running up the phone bill. So you had I had this ticking meter going up every single moment I was online. And that gave you constraints. that
Mhm.
made you had to be more efficient. You had to do things faster.
Yeah.
Kids these days,
I know
have it so
kids these days have no idea. They
so
don't know
easy,
what
yeah.
dial-up modem was like.
Yeah.
And the sound of dial-up, like it still keeps me up at night sometimes.
I still like this is super recent. This is like, I probably shouldn't be telling the story, but a few years ago, my younger brother, we still don't have proper internet, right? But
Yeah.
so he's using his like mobile network and
Mhm.
just racking
Hotspot.
up massive bills and my dad giving him shit. Yeah. So it's alive and well. Don't worry.
Think
Yeah.
before you download, kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so fast forwarding, and you're in the middle of Canada. By the way, maple syrup. It's so Canadian. It's as if you're an ad for the country. All of a sudden, you wind up with arguably or one of the godfathers of AI, recent Nobel Prize winner Jeff Hinton. So talk to us about your journey from being there in the Canadian wilderness to now being in the forefront of AI.
Yeah, I would say that was a lot of luck. Like I just happened to be born, like my closest university was U of T, which is where
Okay.
Jeff taught. And
Okay.
so of
Wow.
course, when I became a computer science student at U of T, I was raised in an ecosystem that just lived and breathed AI. So I sort of say that I was raised into AI from scratch. But that's not enough, right? Like if you have a celebrity professor at your university, like there's many universities that have that. What we had at U of T was Jeff was so open
Mhm.
and welcoming to the student body. He would always have undergrad interns. He taught for ages. He wasn't teaching when I got there, but he really fostered like a doors open policy
Nice.
with
Yeah.
the school. And so when I was starting to learn neural networks, I just emailed him. I emailed him and I said, hey, your ReLU activation function, I think for some, I don't know why I said this, but I think it should be sinusoidal instead of like, monotonic. And he wrote back to me this detailed description of like why it should be monotonic in his mind. And it was just like really welcoming and open.
Give us a fun Jeff Hinton anecdote.
There's a lot. So when I was interning for him in Toronto, I started at Google in the Bay Area, and then I went back to Toronto to finish my undergrad. Either Jeff reached out to me or I reached out to Jeff, and he said, hey, come intern with me at Google Toronto.
Okay.
And so I was in Toronto, I was interning for him, and he really wanted me to do this one project, which was called, I've even forgotten the name now, but something to do with distillation. This idea of like class-wise distillation, and we were going to use some recent results in information theory to inform like a new version of distillation. But I was obsessed with the lottery ticket hypothesis, which was this idea that inside a neural network, in all of these billions and billions of parameters, there's actually a tiny number that actually count. You can throw away 99.9% of the weights in a model, and there's really like this little lottery ticket in there that defines the entire behavior of the model. So I got super interested in that, and I got distracted when I was working on this other thing. And so he was constantly just giving me shit for getting distracted, working on the wrong thing, and trying to steer me back to the thing that he wanted to do. And so in the end, at the end of that internship, I felt bad. I was hassling him so much. I was like going off doing my own thing. And so I carved him out of like a piece of wood that I chopped down on the property, like in my home, a little diagram in the wood of the research that he wanted me to do, like the structure of it. And then later I found out that before he went into computer science, he was training to be a carpenter. And so it was like, it was so perfect.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I don't know if he still has my little gift, but that was
probably looked at it
I'm
and
so
said,
sorry.
instead of doing this, you could have just done the research.
I was right.
Yeah.
You had a great career as a researcher instead of building these silly companies. And I always, when I talk to one of my lecturers, I always think that. Okay. So if I'm thinking about the montage sequence movie of your childhood, I have you chopping down wood in Canada very politely in the wilderness.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Apologizing to the tree.
Conserving bandwidth, learning to code with a lot of gaming. Then were you winding up with essentially this Gandalf-like figure, but the right person on AI before AI was really hot, right?
Yeah.
But I think the next, important milestone would be your participation in. I'm not even going to use the word arguably. I would say maybe the most important academic paper of the last decade. Who knows? Maybe of our lifetime, which is the attention is all you need paper. So talk to us about that. How did you wind up there? What was your memory of the work leading up to it and when it came out?
Yeah. So getting into Google the first time was like total fluke, and I actually shouldn't have been an intern at Google, and I found that out on my last day when Lukash, my manager, he was throwing like a goodbye party for me, and he's saying, "Okay, everyone, Aidan's headed back to school. Aidan, what year are you in your PhD? How much more have you got to go?" And I was like, "I'm going back to third year undergrad." And he was like, "What? Like we don't hire undergrads."
How did that happen? Like, did it just sort of somebody not
just forgotten
or vetted you, or?
Well, I was like emailing. I'm a big emailer, cold emailer. I was emailing a lot of like my favorite paper authors, and so I was sending emails to loads of folks at DeepMind and Google Brain and like all the places where the papers that I was reading, because that's how I learned. I just printed out stacks and stacks of papers, and initially to read a single paper, it would take me like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because I would just like hit a word that I don't know, or like a
go down
phrase,
this rabbit
and then
hole.
I'd have to look up that paper and read that paper first, and so it was such a slow process. And I'd be like sitting at the gym, and in between sets, I'd have my stack of papers with my pencil and just like writing notes. And so every moment of free time was dedicated to studying papers, and learning the stuff. But as a product, I viewed AI researchers as like gods, and so their emails were on the paper. You could email God.
Yeah, you could email them.
it was like right there. And so I would just say like, "Hey, I just read your paper on this. I have this follow-up idea. Like, what if we did do?" And eventually a few of them responded, and some folks at Google Brain. And so they invited me to interview. My resume got passed around. And then I found Lukash. And Lukash had such a cool project idea. It wasn't the transformer. Instead, Lukash, he's always running like a decade ahead of where he should be. Like the research that he does today, it'll actually be ready. The world will be ready for it in a decade. But what he was doing was, we called it one model to learn them all. And his idea was, we're going to model every single data set that humans have created. And so fully multimodal, like text to image, image to text, audio to text, everything, all the different combinations. And we're just going to throw all the data into a model to process it. And now the world's kind of getting to that, right? Like now we have like Omni, like we have these models.
One model.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so it's caught up. But yeah, that was the project that I joined to do.
I want to make sure everyone gets the most important piece of what you just said, which is
cold emails.
No, not even that. There is this amazing based imagery of Aidan, workouts, academic papers, nothing else, right? Like sets and papers, nothing else.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
I mean, other people at the gym are going, how much is he working out? Usually you take notes of like
this nerd.
Well, I don't know what the right word is. It's like it's cracked. It's very kino. Actually, it was a good question. So I'm sure a lot of people watching this are thinking of how do I reach you, and they're probably reading papers that you've written or people you work with have written. What is a good way to attract your attention?
I get a lot of cold emails, and I wish I was that guy who was passing it forward and responding to everyone. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I do respond. Respond. The times I respond, usually it's someone who has an idea that they're testing with me. They're not asking for my time. They're not like, they don't want something from me. they just come to me with an idea. They say, what do you think about X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
And
those you respond
I
to.
usually engage with those.
Yeah. That's great.
Or they say like, Aidan, I'm in like a situation that I need help with. I've heard that you've been in this, right? Like maybe it's starting a company, maybe it's, I don't know, I'm from Canada and I'm trying to blah, blah, blah. Like if it's something that I feel I have a unique ability to help answer or help them get through, then I'll be much more willing to put in the energy to help. If it's something that anyone could answer for them, it's kind of like,
what's the secret to a good cold email? Either ones you've received or ones you've written?
I don't know. Maybe for the ones I've written, I never ever was cold emailing to ask for something. It was always just to talk to the person, to
share an idea,
test their intuition against one of my ideas. Basically, like testing my ideas. That's usually what I reached out for. It was never to get a job. It was never to become an intern.
Got it.
Yeah.
I find it very hard when somebody says, I want 15, 20 minutes of your time, because I wish I could do it, but there's so many of those, it's very, very hard. And sometimes somebody really stands out and do it, but usually you're right. I think when somebody sends you an app or something written, then you can respond and you can engage, and it's more fun. Well, there you go, kids, right? Like between your sets at the gym,
shoot me an email.
Shoot an email and, get back to working out. Okay. So let's get to the meat of it, right? So actually, wait, before that, I want to talk about attention is all you need, right? Like, so you talk about getting to Google. What is your memory of the work leading up to the paper and of the paper itself?
So from my perspective, Lukash and I, we were working on this framework for training models called tensor to tensor. And the whole point was every modality super generic, right? So you could plug it into literally any sort of data, any sort of model, convolutional, autoregressive, whatever. So we were working on this framework. And at the same time, I was sitting next to Noam Shazir at the office. And so we were kind of aware of what he was doing. We invited him to start building, it didn't have a name at that point, but start building his stuff in our system. And so that led us towards attention-based autoregressive models. And then at the same time, there was a third paper. So there was one model to learn them all. There was attention is all you need. And then there was depth-wise separable convolutional blah, 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 which was
much less sexy. Less sexy,
much worse branding. That one never took off for some reason.
I think I know why.
But it's with Francois Cholet. And so that again was like, if you actually look at that paper now, if you go back and read it, very similar to the transformers with convolutions instead of with attention, and the results were really, really close to each other.
Oh wow!
If you look, because we benchmarked them on like the same problem, the same translation problem, and they both performed kind of.
Got it.
Close.
Wow.
Francois is a legend. I think he just left Google.
He did, yeah.
And it struck me as how important he had an impact on Google, because Google actually wrote a whole blog post thanking him for his contributions, which so rarely happens. Okay, so I think let's get to the bit where you're working now. So you are now co-founder and CEO of Cohere. For those audience you're not familiar, give us the short summary of what Cohere is and what you folks are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, we build large language models and we focus on enterprise. And so making them easy to adopt, making sure that enterprises don't get locked in, and making them comfortable. So we're one of the few that hasn't taken one of these cloud recycling deals where cloud puts in $5 billion, you pay it back over 2 years type deal. We're one of the few that hasn't done that. And so we're available on all clouds. We're everywhere, as well as on-prem. So for anyone who's like super paranoid about their data, we're the best choice.
Right.
And the second piece is customizability. And so because we build the models from scratch, we have a lot of places where we can intervene. We could do a custom pre-training, we could do post-training, SFT, RLHF. And so we can offer a lot of customization, much more than just take the final checkpoint and try to fine tune it. We can do something much more substantial and significant. So that's sort of what Cohere does.
Now, I think unpacking that, there's a few if I think about, say, the flow chart of the top AI companies out there, and you folks are one of them, there are a few choices, and you've gone on a certain choice. For example, there's consumer and enterprise, and obviously some folks do both, but you've gone down the enterprise part of the tree. And as you said, OpenAI has a partnership with Microsoft, Anthropic with Amazon. You are cloud agnostic. So why these particular choices?
Yeah. So I think for market, for our customers, not getting locked into one ecosystem is really, really important.
Right.
Like getting, if one of your largest expenses as a company is cloud and you're spending $1 billion a year, you really want to make sure that you don't get squeezed on that line item because it's a big one. So you need optionality. You should very much be reticent to buy something that's only available on one cloud. And this has been like a really important buying decision for data, for databases. Getting locked in to one has been hugely dangerous. And I think similarly in AI, this is going to be as key an infrastructural piece of your tech stack that you don't want to get trapped into one of these ecosystems.
And why enterprise versus consumer? You know, when the whole ChatGPT AI wave started, it was all consumer. Consumer was very sexy, very hot.
Yeah.
And now I feel like it's like tides are turning towards enterprise. Enterprise is sort of where people are seeing value. But why make the conscious choice for Cohere to look at enterprise as a market?
That was always the way that we wanted to have value in the world. So we like the way that we wanted to create value was by enabling everyone else to adopt the technology. Like we saw that this is going to become a foundational piece of the infrastructure of the tech stack. There's going to be like a resurfacing of all products because we have an interface now that we just didn't have before. We have language as an interface. And so because of that, that was the direction that we wanted to go to basically empower everyone else to adopt it and facilitate that change. We never even dipped our toes on the consumer side.
Would you ever at some point? Like
Probably not. Probably not. I think like there's just so much to do. We're so preoccupied with
focusing on the
enterprise
market.
Yeah, I don't know how we would be both a consumer and enterprise company. I don't think there's very many good examples of companies that can do that.
No, we were just talking before we switched on the cameras, and you were talking about you spend a lot of your time talking to customers and talking to enterprises. Paint us a picture of the current state of thinking and adoption in enterprises, and obviously slice and dice by, say, constraints around regulatory versus size. Like, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is working? What are people talking about?
It changed really fast this year. Like if you're asking me about the year before, everyone was so in shock at the technology. They were all sort of just like grappling with the fact that
no one knew
exists.
what to do with it.
Yeah, and they were like trying to spin up tests to understand it, and they were scrambling. It was sort of panicked. That's changed completely. Now when people land at our doorstep, like when someone is speaking to Cohere, it used to be, hey, could you tell us about large language models? What could we do with this technology? Now it's, hey, I have this thing to get done. Why are you better than the other guy? It's such a more streamlined conversation, and it's serious workloads. It's not like I want to play around with it and build an assistant for the CEO of the company or something, right? Exactly. To impress my boss. It's now, hey, we're implementing this product feature. We have these specifications. You need to score this in this benchmark, this and this one. Can you do it? And what's the price?
Wow.
And so the friction of a sale has dropped off a cliff. It's much more straightforward. It's much more of a science rather than an art. And the customer is just way more familiar and smart with the technology.
We were talking about this right before we started recording, where a year ago, I think in public companies, when you look at quarterly earnings, the Q&A side of things, one of the questions would be, what are you guys doing with AI? And they'd be like, well, we're evaluating all technologies. We're trying to see what's out there. Now you still get asked a question, and that question almost always shows up first. And the answer is like, what's your AI strategy? And they're forced to have a more coherent sort of plan on employee productivity, or what are the things tangibly that businesses are doing with AI to be able to have better outcomes, whatever that means for them quantifiably.
The bar has definitely raised. And familiarity, it's starting to get out there. I would say there's still some pretty serious bottlenecks in terms of implementation.
Right.
It feels like an integration game now. Before, there were real questions about, are LLMs just hype? Are they actually going to be useful for the world? Is it going to get good enough to the point where it's useful? All of those questions. I mean, maybe you can push back. Maybe I'm wrong here, but that part of the conversation has gone away.
Yeah.
We're now, we've crossed the Rubicon. We're like,
it's about data now, I
Yeah.
think.
evidently this technology is useful.
Yeah, it's working.
And now it's about actually putting it to work,
Yes.
actually implementing it in the economy. It's such a general technology. And so it's hard to talk about specific use cases, right? Like specific places, but that's because
it's like the internet being like, what do you use the internet for?
Yes,
Oh.
exactly.
Which is actually interesting. I was about to ask you that. You mentioned workloads. What are specific use cases or workloads where people are going, okay, I understand some of the trade-offs, I understand hallucinations, I understand my capabilities on fine training, post-training, pre-training seems a little more unusual, and this is what I want you to do. For example, one use case which seems to have some level of product market fit is all things support. You're training on your knowledge base of support agents, and then you stick an agent out there, and you look at everyone from what Brett Taylor's doing and others are doing. Like, there seems to be some energy around this. But what are you seeing as workloads where people go, okay, I know an LLM can work for me today?
Yeah. No, you're right. The biggest one is probably customer support. That's like a huge cost for companies. And it's a place where these models perform extremely well at. The next one, I would say, broad category, are co-pilots or assistants for your workforce. So maybe you have a team. What's a good example? Let's just say like wealth managers inside financial institutions. You have a team. They're ostensibly researchers, right? Like they have a bunch of clients. Client comes with a request. Hey, I heard about this AI thing. How do I get involved? What would you recommend? They go out, they do research on that thing, put together a plan. That's exactly the type of place where we want to insert these models to help them come up with better plans, do better research, and do it way, way faster. So you can plug in their sources of knowledge. Where does that human turn to do that research? Part of it's like traditional web search, like Google. Another piece of it might be, I don't know, like Bloomberg or Seeking Alpha reports, this sort of stuff. Plug all of that into the model and have it be able to make reference to that, do its own research, and put together a preliminary report with citations back to the source material. Hand that to the human, and something that would have taken them days to complete took them literally 30 seconds.
Wow.
So that's like one example of this general category of RAG agents, retrieval augmented agents, which can do research on a knowledge worker's behalf.
Right. Do you still get pushback around hallucinations in the sense of like enterprise use cases? A couple of things that always stand out. One is just sense of trust, right? Like you don't want the data to ever get out. Some of these are private protected data. They do not want you to train on it and then share it with other people. That's one. How do you deal with that? And two, there is always a sense of, I don't know, like there's little data to train on, which means what happens if it hallucinates and gives us the wrong data or wrong output side of things? How does Cohere deal with both of these?
So with hallucinations, yeah, we definitely still run into it. I would say in the RAG scenario, where you're asking the model to reference an external database of knowledge, much less, dramatically less. Sometimes it doesn't find the knowledge. Like sometimes the retrieval fails, for example, which is why, we build both the generative model and the retrieval models so that we can fully integrate. So sometimes the retrieval fails and the model will say, hey, I didn't find anything. And the user knows, no, it isn't there, like it's wrong. But with RAG, very rarely is it completely making things up. It will say, I don't know, I couldn't find it, instead of dreaming something completely false up. Without RAG, without grounding, it still does happen. but people are just relying more on RAG. That's what we're seeing.
Right.
Wow.
But it's still better compared to what used to be pre-AI, right? Like we hallucinate too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in the
Speak
sense
for
of,
yourself.
I mean, the bar I feel like has been set in a very odd way to be like, well, but it said this thing that is not right.
Mhm.
Or pulled up
Yep.
this report or this dashboard that is not accurate. But we do that all the time.
Yeah.
And so how do you deal with security in a sense of trust, especially getting through the door, talking to customers? I'm guessing, like you mentioned, wealth managers, finance as a use
Mhm.
case, very sensitive about data. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. No, the folks that we work with tend to be the ones who are most concerned with data privacy. We're in an advantaged
Yes.
position because we're not locked in to one
Yes.
cloud.
It has to be a selling proposition for you folks, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so for a lot of these big financial institutions or healthcare institutions or governments, they have a hybrid posture. So they have some on-prem, often majority on-prem, especially with the financial institutions. It's like 60 to 80% on-prem, and then some on a cloud or on a set of clouds. And so that model of where your data lives fits perfectly for Cohere.
Yes.
Because we can touch it wherever it is. And systems that you build with these models, they're only as useful as the data and the systems that they have access to. Like they can only know the data that you allow them to see,
Right.
and they can only automate the processes that use the tools that you let them have access to. And so because we're in such a Cohere is able to deploy so securely, we have like no new security risk. We're not asking you to send data outside of any of your own infrastructure. We can see everything.
You're within the perimeter.
Yeah.
If you mentioned earlier about how things have really improved this year, if you had godlike powers and you could wave a magic wand to do anything, how would you bring about 10x the adoption or 100x the adoption of AI inside the enterprise? What would be the roadblocks you'd have to remove? Would it be security? Would it be mindset? Would it be technological advances or something totally different?
I think all the ambition is there. And technologically, we have the tools. We have both the ability to deploy securely. We have models that perform well enough. Frankly, we just need to do the work. And the key bottleneck is that it's like this integration work. It's just months and months and probably the next half decade of just going in and doing the work to implement the models in these specific scenarios, going after the wealth management team, optimizing that thing, make sure it works well for them, going after the, I don't know, whatever other team is doing research, the finance team, this, that, the other. It's such a general horizontal technology. It touches the entire business. And so you just need to go out and do that work. And company, the large solutions integrators like Accenture and Deloitte, they are going to make a killing because it's like a total refactor of the tech stack. And it's a also difficult one because it's a new technology. And so there's a knowledge gap between internal teams and specialist teams. And so there's just so much work to be done and not enough people to go do it. Maybe we can get models to do the integration themselves. Probably not within the next half decade, but
No, it's funny you say that because we often get people telling, the Accentures, Deloittes of the world, once AI comes in and it's like widely adopted, they're going to be out of business. And I'm like, I keep telling them the opposite can't be more true because like you said, a lot of this has now come down to where is data in these big enterprises? What does integration mean to be able to tap into? And also for these enterprise systems, once you get integrated, it's very hard to take it away and leave, right? And so a lot of these companies now have these big challenges to be able to do enterprise adoption, totally refactor the code base, be able to build all of these integrations from scratch. And so they're not going anywhere. If anything, this is such a boom time for all of them.
And I would say like right now is the opportunity for these application startups just above LLMs because the customer is getting smarter. Before it was like, I'm going to buy the LLM itself and build it myself. Now they're like, okay, I see how difficult this is. Maybe I should think about, buying from someone. And so that familiarity is there. And also the technology is much more stable. at this state. And so if before your fear was, I don't want to build on top of generation 1 because generation 2 is going to completely displace me, I think that's much less likely at this stage.
Oh, why do you say that?
I think that there's going to be a sort of set of capabilities in these models that have reached maturity and will look very, very similar for all of future.
Got it.
The models are getting so good at this stage that they're scratching against, the edges of human knowledge, right? Like one thing that I have been saying a lot recently is before, to make the model smarter, I could grab my friend off the street. I could teach the model something.
Right.
But now I can't go to myself or the average person because I have to go to experts. I have to go to someone who has specifically studied for their entire career medicine or physics or chemistry to teach the model something it doesn't already know. And so it's sort of filling up the space of knowledge.
Right.
And that means that at some stage, a certain set of applications or use cases are good enough. Like they've crossed the threshold of utility, and they're probably going to stay around the same while we work on these more periphery things. Like, can we get these models to help us discover new drugs or, prove mathematical theorems for us? As we go into more esoteric, academically advanced things, that bottom part of that foundation of day-to-day use cases or standard use cases, they're going to stabilize. And so it's safe to build off of that.
This is a great segue to one part of the conversation I really wanted to have with you. So as we're recording this in November 2024, there's always a vibe in the AI community and startup space. And I think the current vibe is that we may have hit a plateau in the scaling laws, in the advancements of what is possible with these large language models. It's hard to often say where it comes from. I think it's a combination of, there has not been a GPT launch which has maybe blown our socks off, and maybe we can discuss that. Or there are always rumors of advancement stalling for any number of reasons. I'm kind of curious to get your take on where we are today and the scaling laws and your prediction for where they continue to hold and advancements we might see over the next, say, 12 to 18 month period.
I think that we're in an interesting point in the technology because we're asking questions. I actually think it's quite market driven or economics driven. If I spend an incremental $5 billion, what am I actually buying for myself? Like, what's the return on that incremental $5 billion? I think we're in a stage of the value curve where it probably doesn't make much sense.
From an enterprise investment standpoint?
Well, certainly from an enterprise investment standpoint, but I'm saying from the foundation model companies.
Oh, got it. Okay.
How we think about,
return on
investment, or more importantly, how our investors
think
about
exactly.
Because you may be saying the return is going to be AGI, but your investors may have more short-term goals.
Well, I would not say that, but someone might say that.
Got it.
So I think we're definitely in the point where investors have just said, no, sorry, we're not going to give you that extra X billion dollars. It doesn't make sense unless those investors are inherently conflicted. Like you're saying to them, I'm going to pay you that money back over the next 2 years for supercompute, in which case,
feel free.
Yeah. Here, take it.
Okay. So you're saying models are plateauing with respect to return on investment.
With respect to return, they're not plateauing. Like, we're not going to, the models are the dumbest they'll ever be, right? And there's still a bunch of really obvious stuff that needs to be implemented. One is this reasoning stuff, right? Like an internal monologue, the ability to spend compute live to think through a problem and make mistakes, catch those mistakes, fix it, iterate. The fact that hasn't been present in the technology, it's been obvious for a long time that we need this. And it's a huge limitation because the status quo is the input space to this model is literally any question. The user can ask the model to do.
It's very generic. It's very broad. Yeah.
Right. And then in one compute cycle, your expectation is that it will get it right.
It has to get it right. Yeah.
That's an insane expectation to place on the technology.
Right.
Now, at least we have the option where, okay, the input space is everything. It's any question you can imagine. But the output space, it's dynamic in the amount of compute that it can use. It can spend, maybe it'll take 5 days to actually answer the question that you asked if it's a hard question. But we actually have that property now where you can dynamically allocate the amount of problem solving power to a given input. The second one that's missing, so that's like the reasoning, internal monologue stuff. The second major technical feature that's missing is learning during its lifetime.
Right.
Right now, all the learning happens before
Right.
pushing to production. And then it's a frozen static object. That's what the model is. It's just sort of like frozen in time. And so it can't learn from feedback. It can't adapt itself. That's another really obvious one where we're going to have to fix that. Like we're going to have to change. It's going to have some sort of real long-term memory of its experience. So I see both of those coming very soon. Obviously, OpenAI put O1 out, which is like the first production reasoner. And it is like the worst form of that we'll ever see. It's still quite early. That's going to improve dramatically. That will unlock tons of new applications of the technology because there's certain problems that can only be solved with reasoning. And so as we make that piece robust, tons of new applications get unlocked. Similarly, with continual learning and a lifelong memory, there's a set of applications where you need that in order for it to be a viable product. And so once we have that, a whole new set of things get unlocked.
Talk to us about, in terms of limitations, but also things which are unlocking improvements. Talk to us about synthetic data.
Yeah. What is synthetic data? What does that even mean? Let's start there.
Yeah. So synthetic data is just data that comes from the model itself rather than a human. And so early on in training these models, we would train on the internet, which is a bunch of human created data, tons of documents, super diverse, amazing. Then we would turn to humans. Like I was saying before, initially just like the average person, you or I. Eventually it became not enough to go to them. And so we would go to students in biology, we'd go to students in math. We would get experts in specific domains. Then we would start to get PhD students, and we would start to get actual doctors teaching the model. Eventually, we started running out of the humans to go to. And so what synthetic data has unlocked is the ability to very scalably, very cheaply generate tons and tons of data. The thing is, it only works in domains, or it only really works in domains that are verifiable.
Right.
Otherwise, the model will just be feeding back on itself and hallucinating stuff and then being taught to believe its own hallucinations. So if you have a domain like math or code where you can verify whether a solution is correct or not, synthetic data works extremely well.
Yeah.
The other place is, instead of asking that human doctor to write an answer to a query from the user from scratch, what if we present the doctor with a few options generated by the model and just let them pick the one that's right? So that speeds up their productivity, makes it much cheaper to get doctor created data.
And help use that to train the model.
Yeah.
I see. Got it.
If you could, again, wave a superpowered godlike magic wand to advance the state of AI over the next 12 months, whether it is inject capital into anybody you want to, or have a bunch of researchers discover new algorithms, or harness people to generate expert level data, or something totally different, what would you do to say get us much further ahead in 12 months than maybe what is this looking like right now?
Yeah, well, I guess the big bottleneck to those two capabilities I was describing, the reasoning and continual learning, is just lack of data. There's very little data on the web that shows reasoning. The internet is kind of the output of a reasoning process. You don't actually see what was going on in the head.
How they're thinking about it. Yeah.
And so you don't have that stream of consciousness that is actually crucial to producing those outputs.
Interesting.
So instead, what we do is we sit people down, we put a mic in front of them, and we just ask them to talk aloud as they're solving problems, and we collect that data. But that's not very scalable. It's super slow. Again, I have to go find doctors now and put them in front of a microphone and get them to like transcribe their thoughts. And also, people are not so good at verbalizing their thought processes often. So if I could magically get a huge source of reasoning and continual learning data, like if I could capture every thought in your head for your entire, hopefully 100-year lifespan, that would be my dream.
I love how similar the answer to this question is with you and other of your peers in the space. I was talking to, just called one of your peers, and this person said, I would love to get a recording of everyone's screen as they're going about every single daily task in a privacy safe, consented manner. And that would be an unlock. And I was like, so because it does seem like the thing which is lacking now is seeing the cognitive steps human beings go through when they're doing things. I want to ask you a little bit about the capital structure required on AI advancement. And I would say there is a view out there that only the really large labs, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, with the capital they're able to attract, can really push the boundaries of AI, right? And there's a few folks on X and Twitter, and the argument is that the scaling laws really matter. And to your point, and they, between their partnerships with the FANG companies or more and more with nation states, probably can attract these huge amounts of capital. And if you're not one of those 2-3 huge pockets of capital, you're not going to be on the frontier. How do you think about that or respond to that?
I guess the question is, how valuable is it to be on the frontier when the technology is moving so quickly and the costs are dropping so fast? I think like the cost to build a GPT-4 like model went from being hundreds of millions of dollars to maybe 10. You know what I mean? Like dramatically
and in
cheaper.
a year, right?
Within a year.
Yeah.
And so if you're willing to be 6 months behind the frontier, you'll save dramatically. And so that's my perspective, is that it's actually really inefficient to be at the frontier. The amount of capital that's getting burned is nonsensical. And we should actually sit slightly behind that in the part of the curve that actually has positive ROI.
Right.
So we'll spend the absolute minimum necessary to meet the needs of market. And we'll continue to do that. And because chips keep getting better, the methods keep getting better, those costs will continue to fall. And eventually it'll be quite cheap to do the things that we do today, or we consider to be frontier today.
Got it. So for model companies, right, companies that do only models as such, the capital investment a year ago, super expensive, now it's cheaper for the same models as such. But can they continue to sustain that is sort of the question. I think you answered it in the context of we don't have enough data that is non-synthetic to be able to train, but what about the cost of it? Like, if you're a pure model company, can you continue to be in just that from a revenue standpoint, from an economic model standpoint?
I think so. I think if you look at Cohere's economics relative to our competitors, our burn rate on supercompute is so much lower. I don't think people fully appreciate how much lower until I've seen the leaks from some of my competitors.
Got it.
But the distance between the models and their capability is not that far.
Wow.
And so it just economically, if you look at this picture of player one is burning at this level, player two is burning at this level, what have they produced? Something's off. And so I think investors who have looked at that playing field and actually critically assess this, they don't want to support these super high burn AGI projects, and they're much more shifting capital towards more viable long-term businesses. Folks are focused on building a viable business.
Got it.
I think there will be a big shift very soon.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
We talked to Anil from Meter, right? And they had built Meter Command, which is this whole tool where the way he was thinking about it, I thought was very interesting. On most of our lives within these enterprise companies goes in dashboard building, in analytics, in trying to draw data and find meaning in them. And what Meter Command does, as an example, is to make this all real time, in the sense of like you can manipulate data. You are able to not sort of be like, show me the revenue from this time to this time, and just, and you're able to sort of like manipulate data, and it goes all the way down to the hardware level for them, right? Because they work with network packets. And I look at that and go, we are sort of in this brave new world of enterprise use cases. I mean, you'd mentioned customer support, makes total sense. Copilot, sort of productivity assistants, makes sense. What are maybe things, use cases, scenarios in enterprise that you wish people used AI for, and it's not quite there yet?
Interesting. I think I wish people used AI for. There's a lot of different applications which aren't yet viable, or which enterprises aren't ready
Right.
to adopt yet. I think that automation is something that has been barely touched.
In the context of robotics and that kind
No,
of
no,
thing.
no. No, sorry. Just in like LLMs driving automation within the
Right.
business.
Yeah.
Like
And-
RPAs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like we finally have the technology to actually build RPA.
Mhm.
Right.
Like before we were really trying, but it
Right.
was like hard. Now we have these general reasoning engines, which we can throw at it. And the problem is the models aren't able to do that job because they aren't integrated. They don't have access to the tools that the humans have access to. They don't have access to the data or systems, right? And so until we actually bring these models into those secure environments and give them access to all the tools and all the information that the human employees have access to, they fundamentally won't be able to do the job. So that's the bottleneck, is you can't expect the models to do what a human does without giving them access to the tools and knowledge that a human has.
Which I think goes to
Fascinating.
your point about it just doing the work, which is the big unblocker.
Yeah.
I know we're almost out of time and you have to run. One last theme. I would say when the history of this era is written, you would have been part of one of the sort of the craziest startup Cambrian explosion stories of our time. Right? And it's too early to say where the chips may lay, but last 20, 30 years is one of the most interesting periods of our time. And you've been through that yourself as a founder. And what is maybe one of the lessons and themes for you personally as a founder over the last year or two, which, for people watching this who want to be founders or founders right now, that you were like, this is what has happened to me?
I think adaptability is the key piece. Things have changed so much in the past few years. Like I've been building Cohere for about half a decade now, and the environment has shifted a lot from the early days when no one wanted to take our call to talk about a cool research project I'm not buying, to now when the whole world is obsessed with this stuff and all over it. The ability to adapt to those environments and change yourself and the company to fit, that's been the only way that we've survived. I think there were a lot of times we could have died if we didn't completely reimagine how we worked. And it's been tough. It doesn't feel good to do that. You shouldn't expect it to feel natural or easy. There will be lots of resistance to change. Humans are very, conservative. They like things to stay stable, safe. But when you're building a company, it's your job to disrupt that and to be the force that does the uncomfortable but correct thing for the company. And so early on, we weren't very good at that. I'm a first-time founder with Cohere. And so I wasn't used to that motion of making people really uncomfortable to drive some very necessary change. But over the years, Nick, Ivan, and I, the co-founders, we've really learned how crucial that is. And it's not intuitive. And so I think, if I had one piece of advice, it's like making sure that founders are aware there are going to be very uncomfortable but necessary things that you're going to need to push through. And don't be afraid of that. You're not doing something wrong.
Wow, I love
Wow.
that.
Such a great note.
I know. I think just reflecting on this conversation, I think two things would stand out. One is, I would say, somewhat of the obvious, is what you folks are doing in pushing the state of enterprise AI. And you're the cutting edge, and who knows where this all lands up, but you're out there making people uncomfortable and doing the work. So that is super impressive. And
He's talking about himself.
Yeah. I'm really good at making people
I like that.
uncomfortable. That's one of my skills.
Well, I actually know.
A whole hour later, Sriram took the worst possible
No.
take.
I actually think there's something there to be said about you folks are adopting something new.
Yeah.
And I think there's so I think there's something there. The second part was just your story, right? From growing up, chopping down trees in Ontario to not having internet to look at you now and everything you've done and everything going on to do is just you should just congratulations on such an amazing journey. I know you're just getting started, but what a story!
Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show today. This is awesome. I mean, I'm sort of an enterprise nerd, and so it was really nice to nerd out on use cases. And I also love the fact that we are now. It's cool again to talk about enterprise products. So
finally,
I'm excited for
that.
We're back.
There we go.
We're so back.
There we go. Aidan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.